Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Thursday, May 7th, and it's Public Service Recognition Week. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, Public Service Recognition Week offers a way to thank people for what they do. This year, one national effort is asking something bigger, how the country understands public service in the first place. Plus, a new executive order makes fixed-price, performance-based contracts the default across the federal government. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is urging water, power, and other critical infrastructure organizations to prepare to operate without internet and other technology services. That's the overarching goal of a new initiative unveiled by CISA this week. The agency says organizations need to be prepared to operate through IT outages and other challenges during a geopolitical crisis. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now with more information. Justin, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Terry.
What is behind this new initiative and guidance from CISA?
Yeah, it's called CI Fortify. The CI, of course, is for critical infrastructure. And this initiative is really pushing, the water utilities and other critical infrastructure organizations that we all rely upon to plan for the day when there could be a crisis that involves cyber attacks. And those cyber attacks could directly or indirectly sever their connections to internet, telecommunications, or other third-party, business services that are delivered, over the internet and other connections. And this is really about not just stopping cyber attacks through cybersecurity techniques. It's about planning for cyber attacks to actually be successful. And what do you do then? So the guidance features two main planning objectives: isolation and recovery. Isolation involves actually proactively disconnecting from networks to safeguard your really important operational technology like industrial control systems. And then recovery would involve, documenting your IT systems, backing up critical files, and practicing when you have to maybe transition to manual mode instead of the kind of automated IT connected cyber environments that we all kind of take for granted these days. So that's what CI Fortify is all about.
That is a real shift in emphasis for these kinds of critical infrastructure organizations. How will CISA help them adopt the guidance?
Well, CISA says it's already conducting targeted assessments of certain critical infrastructure organizations and their ability to meet CI Fortify's objectives. CISA is prioritizing what's called defense critical infrastructure. That means systems that are crucial to military forces and operations. Could be dams, weapon systems themselves, of course, satellite communications, the power systems that feed military bases, water systems that military bases rely upon, and telecommunications systems that we all use, but of course the military also relies upon to a great degree as well. And so CISA Director Nick Anderson briefed the press yesterday. He told us that they've got their first couple of assessments underway under a pilot phase of this initiative. And there could be more of these assessments. There will be more of the assessments that CISA does in the future. They're not naming the organizations that they're assessing just, to protect their identities, but also for security purposes.
If they've rolled out this new strategy, have they also provided metrics for success?
No hard metrics at this point, but Anderson said a couple things. First off, success starting out is just getting organizations to do these types of emergency planning exercises, because that's not something that a lot of critical infrastructure organizations, especially smaller ones, typically do or typically even think about. And so that's one key metric for Anderson. And then there's a longer term side to this as well. I'll let his words explain here.
Success for us in the near term is going to come from those targeted assessments we're doing with critical infrastructure to help them be able to operate within isolation, and then the long-term side, making this sort of emergency planning easier to do, be that OT equipment manufacturers making isolation information available in a factory acceptance test, or system integrators designing safer connectivity patterns for remote management.
CISA lost a lot of people over the last year. Do they have the workforce to support this kind of initiative?
Anderson says they do, and he also pointed out that CISA is going to start hiring again. So as you alluded to, CISA lost roughly 1,000 employees over the last year. That's roughly a third of the staff that they had in place previously. So they've obviously been kneecapped a little bit by that and limited in what they can do. But Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin approved a hiring plan for CISA to make 329 mission-critical hires here in the near term. And now that the DHS shutdown is over, for CISA at least, they are now actually posting those jobs. You can see jobs for cybersecurity advisors, for physical security advisors, for chief human capital officer. They're hiring again for the first time in almost 18 months. So CISA is staffing up. Anderson said CISA will particularly be prioritizing the 10 regional offices that it has. These are basically field offices across the country, staffed with people who work with critical infrastructure and other partners in specific regions across the country. They have both these protective security advisors that work on more of like the traditional physical security and resilience side of things. And then they have cybersecurity advisors who are fully focused on the cyber threat. And they're hiring in both of those areas across those regional offices. Anderson says that they are high on the priority list.
How does this guidance fit into broader cybersecurity trends?
Yeah, Duncan Greatwood, chief executive of Zage Security, reached out with some comments, pointed out that this fits into a trend or a focus on resilience in cybersecurity guidelines rather than kind of a narrower focus on just preventing cyber attacks, kind of accepting that there will be some level of cyber attacks that directly or indirectly affects your operations, and you need to figure out how to deal with that and continue those essential operations through it. There was also guidance that CISA put out back in April on accelerating zero trust adoption in operational technology systems. Again, OT systems are things like industrial control systems, things that operate physical systems that are really critical to a wide range of critical infrastructure systems. So CISA is focusing on this idea of, just creating more resilience within really critical systems and not just, letting one cyber attack, one successful intrusion knock them completely offline.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for this story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, Public Service Recognition Week often thanks people for what they do. This year, one national effort is asking something bigger, how the country understands public service in the first place. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize secure operations and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. At a moment when trust in government is closely tied to how work actually gets done, the National Academy of Public Administration is treating recognition as more than a ceremony. We'll talk about why NAPA is making celebrating the American public servant a year-long effort and what they're learning about durability, trust, and service across every level of government with James Christian Blockwood, President and CEO of the Academy. James Christian, thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to have you back on the show.
Terry, thanks so much. And, I must admit, I'm a frequent listener. And when I go and want to learn about what's happening in management, I do turn into your show. So thank you for doing this.
I so appreciate it. And thank you for joining me during Public Service Recognition Week. One of the things about this week, we love it. It focuses our attention on the work that public servants do, but it concentrates it into a single week. NAPA's got an ongoing campaign for the year that celebrates the American public servant. Talk to me about why you wanted to extend a campaign for an entire year.
Let me start with saying, public servants provide so much to the country, and they're generally underappreciated, undervalued, and most people don't really know what these public servants are doing for us and on our behalf. So it really shouldn't be something that's relegated to a week, but something that we appreciate always. And the Academy really recognizes, one, because of our elected fellows, many of them are public servants, or two, because of the public servants that we interact with or partner with, that work should be uplifted and recognized throughout the entire year. And so the Celebrating the American Public Servant is a national initiative. It's not just one single event. It's not just something that's part of a single point in time. It brings together the Academy Fellows, our partner organizations, some award programs, and the broader public service community, really to shine a light on people who dedicate their careers to making government work better.
One of the things that's really interesting about it, there are some awards, but you've got a lot of other facets to this. You've got storytelling, research, convenings, and as you said, partners. How are you trying to use this campaign to change how we talk about public service?
Yeah, if we take a step back and think about the last year, year and a half, the country really has been having national dialogue about government and not policy, government management and operations and how our public servants serve the American people. And this effort really has three components to it. First, it's to really celebrate public servants. There's an initiative, 250 public service champions, that we worked with Local 250 to help implement across the country. And it's just incredible. We identified 250 public service champions with the help of friends, neighbors, communities, people across the country to just see what public servants are doing in communities that they serve, but people may not have known what they were doing. And it's just incredible. We are highlighting town managers, city administrators, fire chiefs, waste management and water treatment officials, public administrators from schools, just so many public servants from across the country. And so that was the first part, is it's a real recognition initiative of how do we uplift those that are serving our country. The second piece is a research effort. It's looking at what government has done for 250 years to get us to where we are now and what it needs to do for the next 250 years to make sure we're thriving. And we've partnered with a number of different institutions, but one in particular is the Bridge Alliance, to start a Fellows for Democracy and Public Service. It's grant-supported research that looks at interviews and convenings and talks about a wide range of issues, from how do you get young people into public service to addressing challenges in the primary system and representation in Congress, many different issues. But it's doing the research and bringing in data to look at what have we done in the past, what do we need to do in the future to be better and better serve the American public. And then this final piece really is about a national gala. It's not necessarily the culminating part of it, because we want this to be a year-long celebration, but it will be an incredible part of it. June 22nd, it'll be at the Library of Congress. It'll be a remarkable event. We'll bring together 6 of the most prestigious public service award programs and honorees in the country to hear their stories. We'll have keynotes from public servants talking about why they serve and why it's important to continue to serve. And then really it'll just be a celebration. We'll have a public exhibit for people to view the history of public service over the last 250 years, and with a section that focuses on the future, what they should and can expect going forward. And so it's just a real celebration and an opportunity to really highlight all the good work public servants are doing.
James Christian Blockwood is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Public Administration. James Christian, one of the things I always loved about NAPA was you look at public service not just at the federal level, but at state and local and community levels as well. And as you talked about that local government 250, what has been the response there, and what are you learning about the impact of this recognition on the lives of those folks that you called out?
I mean, it's just a lot of gratitude. These are people that go to work every day, head down, aren't really looking for recognition. And so when they get the surprise recognition, they're obviously very thankful. And there are people who maybe not expect that, but certainly deserve it. And you're right. There was a particular focus on local government. Oftentimes, especially here in Washington, we talk about the federal government and things that are happening at Congress or the White House. But government really has many different levels to it. And quite frankly, the parts of of government that touch American lives every day are those that are closest to the community and those that are at the local level. So highlighting those people was really important for us to do. And, what happens at the federal level does tend to have an impact of what happens at the state and local level. So things that you may see or things that may change at the federal level, oftentimes it's the state and local officials that have to account for differences in services or make up for maybe some deficiencies that are occurring. And so it's really important to make sure that those state and local officials kind of get their due recognition for all the work that they're doing on our behalf.
Many of these initiatives touch directly on trust and trust in government. Lots of surveys show trust in government is highest at the closest level to the people who are responding. But are you seeing any connections between highlighting and sharing about accomplishments of great work in the public sector with rising levels of trust?
Well, I don't have any empirical data to support that, but what I've seen and just kind of anecdotally in some of the conversations that I've had is when people understand how government serves them and they understand that better, then trust actually goes up. People start talking about why they appreciate government and how that actually impacts their lives. And I think when people know who's serving them, so it's your neighbor, it's your friend, it's someone that you see maybe daily or weekly, then there's the idea that there's more reason that those people might be trustworthy. And so the idea would be, yes, we have a trust deficiency and a huge gap that we need to repair. Probably has to start at where it's strongest, to your point, at the local level and then build up. But there's real opportunity to do that. And I think highlighting first and foremost where things are working well and how people are being well served is a very good start. And then I think maybe looking at part of that research initiative that I talked about and thinking about how do we reimagine government? How do we think about the design of government and the services? How can they be improved? How can they be better? And then how can we bring the public along? That's another way to really help build trust. So the overall initiative, we haven't necessarily seen the data that show, that trust is increasing, but we do know that trust is higher at the local levels where it's more felt, and that there's real opportunity for that to really have a good positive effect on government more broadly all the way up to the federal level.
As you're rolling through this campaign, and you talked about the variety of products, research, recognition, the gala, are you finding any particular modes of communication or messages that especially resonate?
What I really like about this, I encourage people to come to our website at www.napawash.org, NAPAWASH.org, to learn more about some of the things that we're finding and seeing. But this is what's incredible. It really is to see across our country. If you go into any search engine of your choice and just put 250 public service champions, what comes back are local newspapers that have written up what those officials are doing in their community, a lot of different social media posts, not necessarily from the honoree themselves, but from people in their community and people that they have served, really just having a lot of appreciation and showing their recognition. And then there's dialogue and conversation happening as well. So it's in many different media and different forms, and that's something that's just great to see.
A year-long campaign is hard enough to sustain on its own, but as you're going through this, are there parts of what you're doing now that you hope become durable, that outlast the campaign?
I think the constant focus on improvement, continuous improvement is how we get stronger as a nation. And that research component that looks at reimagining government, what a great time to do that, to look at when we're having a national dialogue about how government serves us, but how do we really prepare ourselves for the next 250 years? And that's something that I don't think we should just do at any point in time, at any moment. We should be building that into the culture of how we serve, into the culture of government. So one thing that I'd probably like to see that really outlast just this single initiative would be an appreciation for how do we continuously look at ways to improving how we serve the American people? And then maybe one other thing that I would add, it's just been so incredible to see this outpouring of support for public servants. Let's not just relegate that to a week during Public Service Recognition Week or even a one point in time or an event. Let's try to do that every day. So if you're the American public and you know that people are serving you well, say thank you and make sure that they know that you appreciate the work that they're doing on their behalf.
Well, you've been a public servant your entire life, so I will return the favor and say thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for public servants across the country. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, and it's a great privilege.
James Christian Blackwood is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Academy of Public Administration. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, customer experience modernization sounds straightforward until agencies try to execute it. But first, a new executive order makes fixed-price, performance-based contracts the default across the federal government. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new executive order makes fixed-price, performance-based contracts the default across the federal government, requiring extra justification and senior approval when agencies want to do something different. Joining me to walk through how that shift could reshape how contracting officers plan, justify, and manage major programs is Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting, Emily Murphy. Emily, thanks for joining me today.
It's wonderful to be with you, Terry.
I'm so grateful that you're on a regular cadence because every time we get you on the show, there's a new executive order to talk about. There's a new one out April 30th. Let's talk about that one.
There is, and it's interesting. As you know, I do some work with the Baroni Center, and one of the very first papers I wrote for the Naval Postgraduate School years ago was on the increase in executive orders in government contracting. And it was looking at the Clinton administration, George W. Bush, Obama administration, the very first Trump administration, and the beginning of the Biden administration. I don't know if I should be thrilled that everyone has discovered government contracting and how wonderful it is, or just surprised that there are so many executive orders you can write on government contracting.
Well, this one is out now pushing hard for firm fixed price contracts. What is behind this administration's new EO? I mean, they've been pushing in this direction for a while. Why did we need a new EO to continue the argument?
It's an interesting question because the preference for firm fixed price contracting goes back to 1994 in the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act. Performance-based contracting, it goes back to the fiscal year 2001 NDAA, where we required performance-based for services. So the underlying policy here is a long-established, good government contracting policy. The question then really becomes, why do we need, what hasn't taken? I think that Jason Miller wrote an article that explored that even though this is the preference, it hasn't been as widely adapted as the administration wants it to. So this is another attempt to say, okay, what do we need to do to really reinforce this? And it follows essentially on even the FAR deviations from the Revolutionary FAR overhaul also reinforced this preference for firm fixed price and performance-based contracting.
This EO adds a new approval layer, requires agency head approval for cost reimbursement or other non-fixed price contracts. How is that going to change the day-to-day behavior of the contracting offices?
So I think that the first thing it'll do is it will make contracting officers reluctant to, or more reluctant to, use something other than a firm fixed price contract unless absolutely necessary. I don't think it's going to lead to unbundling of contracts or breaking requirements apart because, frankly, I don't think we've got the workforce to do that. So I think that this will indeed promote the use of firm fixed price contracts. But it's also going to slow down contracting. So for those cases where something other than firm fixed price is appropriate, and I don't mean there are exceptions in there, obviously, for R&D, it is going to require that it has to go up to the head of the agency. And in the case of an assisted acquisition, it suggests that it may even need to go to both agencies for review. So that really could slow things down. It could also change the incentive to use an assisted acquisition agency if you're going to need multiple levels of review.
So there seem to be folks who are on the pro side that this is good, as you say, for accountability and cost discipline. There are folks who say, but this is going to make it harder and slower. How does the administration balance that tension?
Well, I think it's really about risk shifting. And so if you go back to the initial premise behind firm fixed price contracts, the idea was, when appropriate, the private sector, by setting a firm fixed price, is going to have the incentive to keep the price down because they're going to want to compete and win the work. But they're also not going to want to make it unreasonably low because they're going to want to be able to cover their costs and have a profit. And then we've sort of said at that point in time, we're not going to ask them what their profit is. We're going to let them have the profit they deem that they can build into it and still win and still be the lowest, still be the best value for the government. Whereas in cost reimbursement, the government's bearing that risk. Every time that there's an additional cost or a change, the risk is borne by the government. The challenge we're going to see in this, though, is if things that wouldn't have previously lent themselves to being firm fixed price are put into that bucket, are we going to have more modifications to contracts? Are we going to have repricing of contracts? Are we going to see this coming in later? And so how do you train contracting officers and how do you build the flexibility into those contracts so that we don't end up in a cycle where we're having to come back and revisit the same requirements again and again to build in that flexibility that we were trying to get by making it firm fixed price?
Emily Murphy is Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Emily, when I think about firm fixed price contracts, I think it works great when I know exactly what I want to buy. But when you think about really big, complex acquisition projects, we may not know exactly what we want. There may be some experimentation. Requirements may shift. How does this new rule, if we can call it that, I know it's not formal, but new guidance, how's that going to shift how agencies do requirements determination?
I think it's going to require that they look at not just the immediate requirement, but the evolution of it. So it could lead to better acquisition planning so that we're actually thinking about how a contract, how a purchase is going to evolve over time. However, the challenge is that we're not prescient. And so the contracting officers, the programs, those who are coming up with the acquisition plans, developing the requirements, aren't always aware of what's going to happen either on a global scale, on a national scale, on a technological scale. How are things going to evolve over time? And requirements do evolve. That's why we've got modifications already, and the ability to be brought in there. It is going to be a question, though, of how do you price for that? How do you build that flexibility in? And are each of those going to, if there's a modification and it's $5 million, but the overall contract was $20 million originally, does this now put it above the threshold? Or does it require another level of review? So in some ways, it may give agency heads a better control over scope creep. And that could be a very positive thing. Or it could slow down day-to-day operations when a normal change happens that just was not calculated for. A lot of it's going to depend on what ends up happening with the actual FAR case.
You mentioned scope creep there. Do you feel like acquisition offices and agencies in general have the discipline to hold to a requirement that's put out in a firm fixed price contract as things change?
Well, do we always want them to? Do we want to continue to pay for a set of requirements that no longer meet our needs? Or is that the appropriate time for contracting officers to be working with their programs, to be working with agency leadership to say, look, we need to pivot and we need to adjust? And if this leads to that being a more transparent conversation about what that's going to cost and what the cost benefits on that might be, that could be a very positive outcome. One thing I do think is fascinating in the executive order is the requirement for the 90-day review for each agency of their 10 largest non-firm fixed price acquisitions, especially since it says that it applies not just to the contracts that they awarded for themselves, but also for contracts they awarded on behalf of others. So that's going to also require that GSA and others go back and look at contracts where they weren't the ones who developed the requirements. It's also going to be interesting to see how this ties into the reviews that are already taking place at the SPE level on the desire to do non-commercial solutions. So, how does that tie in with the prior executive order on that topic? And so how do we fit this all together so we make it a seamless work stream rather than a series of stops and starts?
That's a good question. And when you think about those 10 largest non-firm fixed price contracts, the executive order does still allow for cost reimbursement contracts in limited circumstances like research and development, for example. How are they going to balance where firm fixed price lands and where it's not appropriate?
And I think that we're going to have to look to both the training and the rulemaking to understand that. Now, R&D, I think most people would agree that R&D is very hard to do on a firm fixed price basis because in R&D, you're assuming that there are a bunch of unknowns, that you're going to be learning things as you go along, and that there are going to be starts and stops, there are going to be errors, there are going to be new discoveries, there may be dead ends. So in that, if we go back to that risk shifting calculus, it's more appropriate that the risk be borne on both sides, because you're going to want each set to be, both the contractor and the government, to be very involved in managing those costs. And that's why we cap the profit on those contracts also. Whereas with a commercial type procurement, if you're just buying a product, there's really not much risk. And so the firm fixed price model makes sense. When we get into services is where it gets much more difficult. And this also seems to fit into the discussions that we've seen about how do we want system integrators to work? How do we want consulting contracts to work? How do those fit into the federal ecosystem? And what's the appropriate role for those entities to be playing?
So what's the next step here? How does this get from executive order into the FAR?
So there are, first we've got the 90-day review with data going back to OMB on contracts. We also have a fairly aggressive timeline for a draft FAR case and starting that rulemaking process. It'll be interesting to see if that's integrated into the RFO rulemaking process or if it's done as a separate process. And then we've got the requirements that both the Federal Acquisition Institute and the Defense Acquisition University have to develop training on how to implement this. So we've got, this isn't going to be the light bulb goes on tomorrow, but it is very much going to be a change in the process for what were already the outlier contracts. A lot of work is currently being done firm fixed price. It's going after those that are not, that could appropriately be put into that bucket.
Emily Murphy is Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Emily, thanks for joining me, and we'll look forward to next time when there might be a new executive order to discuss.
Thank you, Terry. Great being with you again.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, customer experience modernization sounds straightforward until agencies try to execute it. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Federal leaders are under growing pressure to improve how the public experiences government, even as they manage compliance, security, and aging systems. We'll explore where agencies are encountering the most friction and what's helping them move from intent to execution with General Manager for U.S. Federal Government at Granicus, John Bursler. John, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Terry.
I want to talk a little bit about how Granicus is reorganizing its leadership. You're putting more focus on federal agencies at a time when a lot of technology promises are colliding with real execution limits. From what you're seeing, what's driving agencies to demand tighter alignment between their technology partners and their mission outcome?
Well, it's more important now than it ever has been. I think with lots of discussion around artificial intelligence and how we use that to better serve Americans is critical right now. And Granicus, in particular, the Federal Experience Cloud that we're announcing here and launching here, I think brings a lot of what we do already in the federal government from a software perspective, communications, secure, direct communications, the way that agencies get that message to the citizens they serve as quickly and easily as possible, and enroll them in the programs that they're eligible for. As a former customer of Granicus, when I was at the Department of Veterans Affairs, we were able to really reach millions of unenrolled veterans and get them connected to healthcare and benefits using the outbound SMS and email and dashboarding tools that we now have rolled into our Federal Experience Cloud. So I think it's an important time to be in this government technology business because we're able to shape what happens next. And, Granicus is not just in the federal government. We serve state and local, but we're purpose-built for government, as we like to say. So 7,000 customers across the United States. And so we send billions of insights, and we want to use all that data to really help inform the next step and to build these models of the future.
When you think about all of that data, a lot of vendors talk about improving outcomes, but for agencies, that can often mean fewer complaints, faster process times, clearer information for the public. When you're talking to federal leaders now, how are they defining success for these kind of customer or citizen outreach programs?
I think driving more to digital services so that you can cut down the wait times on call centers, so that you can reduce the number of folks having to drive multiple hours to get services in a physical location is absolutely important. I mean, some of the work that we're doing for some of the high-impact service providers like Social Security Administration, for example, is like really hitting the mark in terms of converting over 100 million Americans into myssa.gov and the new digital experience that has provided, and cutting down paper delivery of these statements and that information that is so critical on how many quarters have I paid into so that I can retire in security, right? So I do think that there's so much that we are doing currently at every cabinet level agency, but there's so much more that we should be doing and could be doing, especially with the launch of our Federal Experience Cloud, which really brings together our software, all of those data insights, and the services, the Granicus Experience Group services that have been so successful for our federal customers in the past.
When you talk about that service delivery, a lot of agencies are finding that it's intersecting with cybersecurity and accessibility and compliance, and they don't have as much staff as they used to deliver these kinds of programs. Where do you see agencies struggle the most to coordinate all of those demands, even when they really, really want to get it right?
I think the resourcing is in helping leadership understand and make decisions based on the data that they have, particularly around human resources and how much they should be investing. We can help inform that. We have a really important tool called the Government Experience Insights Dashboard, where, and I wish we would have had this when I was in service, as we talked about in our former positions earlier. It's really important to be able to see all of the data in one picture. So I can pull operational metrics, I can pull experience data, I can pull engagement data to really help inform where I should be investing those critical taxpayer dollars to drive more digital experiences and cut down on paper costs, as I mentioned earlier. And hopefully that can reduce the number of hours spent by federal employees and other contractors.
John, you talked about 100 million people migrating to MySSA, but there is still a segment of the American population that is not digital and does not engage with the federal government in a digital way. How can agencies make sure that as they're moving the majority of people to a digital experience, they still have the capacity to reach those who aren't online? Absolutely.
This is something that, as a former government official, I dealt with and considered often, daily, right? And it's how do we design for all? And I think that's so critical because it's really about, even if they do have access, it's really about preference too. And we have to respect that. So because it is our obligation to deliver this information to our constituents, we want to do the best we can to help advise our agency partners and show them that if we can design an alternative way to reach these individuals, whether they're highly rural or their preferences are different or they're just not connected, then we can certainly do that through a lot of our Granicus Experience Group persona development and journey mapping and what of the human-centered design elements and make those recommendations in concert with the digital first approach, where we're sending text messages, we're able to communicate one-to-one or one-to-many with our platforms, sending email newsletters. Like all of this can be coordinated in that multi-channel or even omni-channel environment.
I'm speaking with John Bursler. He's General Manager of U.S. Federal Government at Granicus. John, anytime I talk to somebody about improving government technology, AI has to come up. So here it is. It's increasingly part of how agencies are thinking about service delivery and internal operations. From your perspective, where are agencies most cautious about using AI right now? And what questions are they asking before they're willing to scale these AI tools?
I think a lot of agencies are really trying to determine how AI ready they really are. And every agency has a different need or a different use case to deploy different models. And what we're seeing is yes, there's an appetite and there's certainly an interest and there's a push, I think, not only from the private sector, but the constituents that we directly serve to ensure that we're developing these tools. So how do we kind of design for that, and how do we keep that in mind given that every agency is so different in the way that they deliver services and understand that data. I think that's really what puts Granicus at a significant advantage, and especially with the launch of our Federal Experience Cloud. We have these billions of insights that we've collected, and we've served hundreds of millions of Americans and across state, local, and federal government to be able to then train these agents and train these models to then deliver these services and experiences much faster, more effective, and all the while saving the agency money, hopefully. So I do think that many agencies are looking at it from that perspective of, can this drive better service delivery while at the same time saving, government personnel hours and financial resources that are appropriated by Congress, and they're, of course, need to be spent very prudently on behalf of the American people. So we can help advise that by pulling that data into our, as I mentioned earlier, our GXI, or Government Experience Insights dashboard, to say, well, here's the full picture. Here's how people are engaging. Here are people that aren't engaging. Here's where AI can play a role, because we're using AI to inform that dashboard itself. So there's really a great nexus there.
One of the ways to move this process forward is leveraging the expertise of both the folks in government and the private sector. You've been on both sides of the equation. From your perspective now, in practical terms, what does a productive public-private partnership look like while agencies are trying to modernize their systems and meet their near-term mission demands?
I think it's critical for us to work in tandem. Like, I relied on a lot of advice, not only from my direct government employees when I was in service at the Department of Veterans Affairs, of course, but also the vendors that we worked with that were learning about new tools and new ways to deliver services faster, more effectively, more cost effectively, especially with either whether they were commercial customers on the outside or state and local governments, where they were testing and incubating new ideas and then bringing that into a FedRAMP secure environment like Granicus delivers with our Federal Experience Cloud. So coming on this side of the fence, so to speak, given my government experience, I think that does aptly prepare me to help our partners at agencies make these strategic level decisions, by gathering that data and having sat in the seat myself and faced a lot of the pressures that are on us to make these prudent decisions on behalf of those that we serve. I mean, I got the opportunity to testify in front of Congress 6 times, and I think that experience, as you well know, and is an incredible opportunity to tell the agency's story, but also be honest about the challenges we face. And I think that Granicus in particular, and many of our partners and other vendors in the federal space, state and local space as well, can help really inform the new direction and strategy for each of the federal agencies that have such an important mission to deliver every day.
This process seems to be moving really, really quickly. Technology is moving faster than we can imagine every 24-hour cycle. So if you were thinking about this a year from now, what problems do you expect to have solved in customer experience, and what new ones will we be looking at?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And I hope, we were talking about like futurism yesterday with my team. We had all of our federal customer success and sales and all of our product people in the room. And it was so neat to be able to be here, like you said, in this moment where we have these technologies that are rapidly developing in a very dynamic environment. And how do we ensure that it's secure? And how do we ensure that if they are aimed at improving experiences, how are we measuring that? So if I were to think forward for a year from now, on April 9th, 2027, I really hope that we're able to think that this was the moment when we launch Federal Experience Cloud, when we think about helping agencies become more AI ready, when we think about uniting our software, our data, and our services together to be forward deployed with our federal partners and our federal customers, that we made the right investments based on the data and based on the information that our federal leaders and the employees that we work with hand in hand every day were providing us. So I hope that everything in terms of delivering a world-class customer experience, where there are certain agencies that are very good at this and there are certain agencies that are still developing this. I hope that we're in the left seat or the right seat, depending on where you're driving from, to be able to help them do that. And it has to be an omni-channel experience. Back to your point made earlier, we have to design for all. If the people aren't accessing information digitally, or they don't want to receive a text or an email from the government on a particular service, so how do we think about that from a broader perspective, but at the same time continue to enroll more folks in services in a digital way?
I've been speaking with John Bursler. He's General Manager of U.S. Federal Government at Granicus. John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Defense Department has struck deals with some of the nation's largest technology companies to deploy their advanced artificial intelligence capabilities on its classified networks. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more details. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
What exactly did the Pentagon announce here in terms of AI?
Yeah, so last Friday, DoD said it struck agreements with SpaceX, OpenAI, Google, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, and Reflection to integrate their AI capabilities into the department's Impact Level 6 and Impact Level 7 network environments. So Impact Level 6 is used for the storage and processing of information classified up to the secret level. And then when we're talking about Impact Level 7, that's highly restricted data. Then following that announcement on Friday morning, DoD CIO posted on social media platform X saying that Oracle had agreed to join the list of AI companies. So now we have these 8 companies deploying their AI capabilities into the classified environment. Of course, most of these companies are DoD contractors already, and I wanted to highlight what DoD said about this. They said these agreements will accelerate the transformation toward establishing the United States military as an AI-first fighting force, and will strengthen our warfighters' ability to maintain decision superiority across all domains of warfare.
Anastasia, how does this fit with or connect to the Pentagon's broader AI strategy? What does it mean to have them inside the classified networks?
Yeah, so earlier this year in January, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth released an AI strategy for the Defense Department, for the Department of War. He said, as I mentioned, DoD needs to become an AI-first force. That includes unleashing experimentation with America's leading AI models department-wide. It includes aggressively identifying and eliminating barriers to deeper integration. And then it also includes executing the set of pace-setting projects. There are about 7 or 8 of them, and those are focused on warfighting, enterprise, and intelligence areas. And these projects will kind of be crucial and will be critical foundational enablers for DoD. So this deal continues Hegseth's push to bring commercial AI into the Defense Department, and that would be following the launch of GenAI.mil platform in December that has gotten a lot of attention. So, for example, with GenAI, the initial rollout featured Google's Gemini. That is used for sensitive but unclassified information. But the goal ultimately is to introduce more models that will be available on all classification levels, and that will be available both to civilians and service members as well as contractors. Here's Andrew Mapes, the Defense Department's acting Principal Deputy Chief Digital and AI Officer.
On the business side, like I was talking about with agents, so looking to continue to employ agents, and with the rollout of Agent Designer as part of the Google Gemini GenAI.mil capability that we rolled out last month. So continue to push the adoption of that, as well as looking at continue to modernize GenAI.mil, not just at IL5, but IL6 and 7 with additional models incorporated in that.
Anastasia, what stands out to you about this announcement? Maybe both what it does say and what it doesn't say.
Yeah, of course, the elephant in the room is that the announcement excludes Anthropic. And Anthropic was the first AI company to deploy its models on the Pentagon's classified networks. The company was, of course, later designated by Hegseth as supply chain risk, and that was following a dispute over how the military can use the firm's AI models. The status is usually reserved for foreign companies that pose national security threat. The department said the companies it signed deals with that we're talking about will deploy their capabilities for lawful operational use. And that's, of course, the standard that was at the center of that dispute between Anthropic and DoD. At the same time, the company's tools were widely viewed as kind of superior to other competitors, and military users have been pretty slow to phase those out. But when announcing these deals with the 8 companies, Emil Michael, the Defense Department's Undersecretary for Research and Engineering and the department's Chief Technology Officer, said last Friday that the company is still a supply chain risk. He previously said he is pretty confident that DoD can very quickly phase out Anthropic's products without major disruptions. Here's Emil Michael.
Well, one of the problems, without getting into the specifics about Anthropic, is that we had one primary provider on classified networks. That doesn't work for the Department of War. It shouldn't work for any complex organization. We have to have other options.
What kinds of missions will these tools ultimately support?
We don't know. We don't have those details. And at this point, we don't know. We have a couple of clues. So, of course, the strategy gives us a couple of clues because they say that the effort will enable new capabilities across warfighting, intelligence, and enterprise operations. So we talked about that. But also in the statement that they released last Friday, they said that these AI capabilities will streamline data synthesis, elevate situational understanding, and augment warfighting decision-making in complex operational environments. So these are just a couple of clues to give us an idea of what to come.
And do we have a timeline of when the tools will actually be available to users rather than when they're beginning to be rolled out?
Not yet. The Defense Department hasn't provided a timeline for when these models will be operational on classified networks. But like with Gen AI that we just discussed, Andrew Mapes said that those models are expected to come online over the next couple of months as the Defense Department continues to expand GenAI.mil into higher classification environments. So we'll see.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for bringing us the story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.